A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
18 minutes. That is less time than it takes me to decide what to watch on Netflix, and significantly less time than it takes for me to actually get off the couch and find the remote.
It is staggering, Corn. I am Herman Poppleberry, and I have been staring at these figures from the Mandiant M-Trends 2026 report all morning. We are talking about breakout time, the window between an attacker first gaining access to a system and the moment they start moving laterally to find the real prizes. It has dropped from 48 minutes just 2 years ago to a median of 18 minutes today.
Today's prompt from Daniel is about the doctrine of defense in depth, and honestly, if the window of opportunity is only 18 minutes, I am starting to think the depth of our defense is about as thick as a coat of paint. Daniel wants us to look at where this strategy came from, how it is evolving with agentic artificial intelligence, and whether the old ways of just backing things up are enough anymore.
It is the perfect time to talk about this because we just saw Kevin Mandia and Alex Stamos at the RSA conference earlier today, and their warning was pretty dire. They are saying that artificial intelligence is now discovering vulnerabilities faster than human teams can possibly patch them. The static perimeter, that old idea of the medieval castle with a single big wall, is essentially dead.
The castle analogy always felt a bit romantic to me. You have the moat, the drawbridge, the boiling oil. It sounds great until someone flies over the wall in a helicopter. Or in this case, until an AI agent finds a hole in the basement window that no one knew existed. But this whole idea of layering defenses is not actually a tech invention, is it?
Not at all. It actually goes back to the Roman Empire around 200 AD. Before that, the Romans relied on forward defense, basically trying to stop every single barbarian at the literal edge of the border. But as the empire grew and the threats became more mobile, they realized they could not hold a hard line forever. So they shifted to a layered approach. They built fortified towers and signal networks deeper into their territory. The goal was not to stop the invasion at the gate, but to exhaust the attackers as they penetrated deeper, slowing them down until the main legions could arrive.
So it was a strategy of friction. You make it so annoying and costly to move forward that the attacker eventually gives up or gets caught. Then the National Security Agency takes that in the 1990s and says, hey, let's do that with servers.
That is exactly the lineage. The NSA adapted it into what we call defense in depth today. But for a long time, the industry got lazy. We went back to that castle model because it was easier to sell. You buy one giant firewall, you feel safe, and you call it a day. But as we saw on March 6th, when the White House released President Trump's cyber strategy for America, the government is officially moving away from that checkbox compliance mentality. The new 5-page strategy is all about measurable resilience and something they call defending forward.
Defending forward. That sounds like a polite way of saying we are going to hack them before they hack us.
It is a shift toward offensive capabilities being part of the defensive conversation. But more importantly, it acknowledges that you have to assume the breach. You have to assume the attacker is already in the 18-minute window and build your systems to be resilient enough to survive it.
Which brings us to Chintan Gurjar. He just released this Defense in Depth 2026 framework, and it is a beast. He is not talking about 3 or 4 layers anymore. He has mapped out 10 layers with 101 subdivisions. Herman, who has time for 101 subdivisions? My to-do list has 3 things on it, and I am already overwhelmed.
It sounds like a lot, but Gurjar's point is that the threat landscape has changed because of agentic AI. We are not just fighting human hackers who need to sleep and eat. We are fighting autonomous agents that can probe thousands of vectors a second. Layering is the only way to create enough speed bumps to break the automation.
One of the things that caught my eye in that framework was how it handles code. There was a study from AppSec Santa earlier this month that found 25.1% of AI-generated code samples contain at least one security vulnerability. We are basically using AI to write code that has a 1 in 4 chance of being a backdoor.
And that is the paradox. We are using AI to speed up development, but we are also accidentally automating the creation of vulnerabilities. If a developer is using a coding assistant and does not have a layered defense to catch those bugs, they are just handing the 18-minute breakout time to the attacker on a silver platter.
So if the perimeter is dead and the code is buggy, what are the layers that actually matter in 2026? Because I feel like we've been told for years that if we just have a good backup, we are fine. But Daniel's prompt mentions that the debate has shifted from backups being insurance to resilience being a requirement.
The backup situation has become a total nightmare. Sentinel-1 just released data showing that 50% of cyber attacks this year are bypassing backups entirely. They are not even bothering to encrypt your data anymore. They just steal it and threaten to leak it. If you have a backup of the data they stole, great, you can restore your system, but they still have the data. The extortion is the attack, not the encryption.
That is like someone stealing your diary and you saying, "It is okay, I have a photocopy." It does not matter that you have a photocopy. They are still going to read your secrets to the whole school.
If the old way was building 5 walls, the new way is making sure every single person and every single device inside those walls has to prove who they are every time they try to open a door. It is about removing that implicit trust. NIST SP 800-207 is the definitive guide here. It says that no matter where you are on the network, your identity must be verified. In a world where 45% of breaches are happening in the cloud, that is just negligence.
So the old 3-2-1 rule is toast? 3 copies. 2 different media, 1 off-site?
That was only possible because they tracked the infrastructure layers that these threat actors were using. The attackers have their own version of defense in depth. They use residential proxies, encrypted tunnels, and modular malware to stay hidden. If we are not using layered defenses to find them, we are bringing a knife to a drone fight. You have to have automated testing that proves the backup actually works. Most people do not find out their backups are corrupted until they are already in the middle of a crisis.
If I am a software developer, defense in depth sounds like something the CISO worries about while I am just trying to get my code to compile. How does this apply to the actual dev process? Is it microsegmentation?
You use static application security testing, or SAST, and software composition analysis, or SCA, to catch vulnerabilities before the code ever hits production. SAST looks at your actual code for logic flaws, while SCA checks your libraries for known vulnerabilities. But even then, you assume your code will have a bug, so you implement a tactic like parameterized SQL queries. That way, even if an attacker finds a way to feed malicious input into your app, the database layer treats it as data rather than a command. That is a classic defense in-depth move. One layer fails, the next one holds.
It is like wearing a belt and suspenders. If the belt snaps, you are still decent. But what about the human element? We hear about MFA fatigue all the time.
Shifting smart is the evolution of shift left. Instead of just dumping a bunch of security tools on a developer and telling them to fix everything, you use things like production bill of materials, or PBOMs. That is exactly why the industry is moving toward phishing-resistant hardware keys like the YubiKey. The controversy around MFA fatigue has reached a breaking point. In early 2026, we saw a massive spike in these push bombing attacks.
And then you combine that with policy as code, right? Like Open Policy Agent?
It is a much stronger layer because it requires physical presence. This is a huge part of what we discussed in episode 1474 regarding non-human identities. When you have AI agents and automated scripts running your infrastructure, you can't rely on a guy named Gary to check the settings. You need the system to defend itself.
Poor Gary. He is always the one we blame. But let's bring this down to a more personal level for a second. Most of our listeners aren't managing 10-layer defense frameworks for global corporations. They're just trying to make sure their bank account doesn't get drained by a bot in some far-off country. Daniel asked about personal security applications of defense in depth. What does that look like for a normal person in 2026?
It is the same philosophy. Don't have a single point of failure. The first layer is identity hardening. Most people use the same email address for everything. That email address is your primary identity. It is essential now. 3 copies of your data. 2 different types of media, like a local drive and a cloud bucket. 1 offsite copy. And the final one stands for 1 immutable or offline copy. This is the layer that saves you from the Hendala-style wiper attacks. If your backups are connected to the network, the malware can find them and delete them.
I have started doing that, and it is actually satisfying to see a phishing email go to an alias I only used once for a free pizza. It is like a little early warning system. What about hardware?
FIDO2 and passkeys. This is the biggest jump in personal security we have seen in a decade. Traditional multi-factor authentication, where they text you a code, is incredibly vulnerable to SIM swapping or just basic phishing. But passkeys are phishing resistant. They require a physical device or a biometric check that is tied to the specific website you are visiting. It blocks something like 99.9% of account takeovers. Kevin Mandia, the founder of Mandiant, was talking about this at the RSA conference this month. He said, "We are entering the era of autonomous defense. If the bad guys are using AI to find the holes, we have to use AI to plug them."
And then there is the home network itself. I saw Daniel mention WPA3 encryption. Is that really that much better than the old stuff?
If you only have one layer, the AI has nothing to compare the data against. In the old days, someone could sit in a car outside your house, capture a little bit of data from your Wi-Fi, and then spend all night trying to crack your password on their own computer. WPA3 makes that much harder, but again, it is just one layer. If you have WPA3 but you haven't changed the default password on your router, you still have a hole in your defense.
At what point does adding a 21st layer actually make you less secure because it creates more complexity and more chances for a misconfiguration? The cost of cybercrime is forecasted to pass $10.5 trillion globally this year. That is a lot of incentive for the bad guys.
The goal should be integration, not just accumulation. This is why 70% of enterprises are projected to move to zero-trust architectures by the end of this year. They are trying to consolidate those layers into a single, cohesive strategy where identity is the new perimeter.
It is a massive shift from where we were even 5 years ago. I remember when people thought a strong password and a firewall were enough. Now, if you're not thinking about non-human identity and API key security, you are basically wide open. We actually talked about that back in episode 1474, about the end of API keys and securing non-human identities. It ties directly into this because those keys are often the weakest link in a layered defense. If an attacker steals a static API key, they can often bypass several layers of defense because that key is treated as a trusted insider.
That secret zero paradox is the Achilles heel of defense in depth. If you have the master key, the number of locks on the door does not matter. That is why rotating credentials and using short-lived tokens is so critical. You are essentially making the keys expire so fast that by the time an attacker tries to use one, the lock has already been changed. This is the machine speed response in action.
It is a bit like my strategy for avoiding chores. I make it so complicated for Herman to ask me to do the dishes that he eventually just does them himself. It is a constant game of cat and mouse, but the mouse is now a super intelligent donkey, and the cat is a sloth with a very high-end laptop.
I can confirm that Korn's defense in depth against household labor is world-class. It is truly impenetrable. But on a serious note, this shift toward resilience is the only way forward. We saw this in episode 771 when we talked about high-stakes redundancy. When you are dealing with critical systems, you can't just hope for the best. You have to build for the worst.
So for the developers listening, the takeaway is to move beyond just scanning your code. You need those PBOMs and you need policy as code to handle the agentic threats. And for everyone else, get your passkeys set up and start using email aliases.
It is about resilience, not perfection. The Romans knew they could not stop every raid, but they could ensure the empire survived the attack. We need to have that same long-term view. We need to audit our tool sprawl.
It is wild to think that a strategy used by Roman soldiers in 200 AD is still the most effective way to protect a cloud server in 2026. Some things never change. I think we have covered a lot of ground here, from ancient Rome to the White House strategy of 2026.
What I find fascinating is the human element in all of this. We talk about AI agents and automated policies, but at the end of the day, someone has to decide what is worth protecting. Kevin Mandia made a great point at RSA. We are in an arms race where the weapons are getting smarter, but the strategy is still fundamentally about human willpower and preparation.
Well, my willpower is currently focused on whether or not we have any snacks left in the kitchen. But before we go, we should probably mention that if you want to dive deeper into how these attacks actually play out, check out episode 1230. We talked about how hackers can live in an account for 200 days before they are even detected. It really puts that 18-minute breakout time into perspective. If they move that fast once they are in, imagine what they can do with 200 days of quiet access.
It is a sobering thought. But that is why we do this. The more you know about the mechanisms, the better you can build your own layers.
We have covered a lot of ground today, from the Roman signal towers to the White House's new cyber strategy. It is clear that the old castle is a ruin, and we are all living in submarines now. Just make sure your hatches are sealed.
And that your backups are immutable.
Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flemingtop for keeping the layers of this show running smoothly.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show. Their serverless infrastructure is actually a great example of modern, isolated environments that contribute to a more secure development lifecycle.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you're finding these deep dives helpful, we would love for you to leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really does help other people find the show and join the conversation. Defense in Depth isn't just a technical setup, it is a mindset of constant, layered friction.
A mindset that is more necessary now than ever. With $10.5 trillion on the line this year, the friction you create today could be the only thing that saves your data tomorrow.
Well said, Donkey. Well said.
Thank you, Sloth. I think we have given people plenty to think about for their next 18 minutes.
Hopefully they spend at least one of those minutes setting up a passkey.
One can dream.
Alright, that is our deep dive into the evolving world of defense in depth. Big thanks to Daniel for the prompt. It is always good to look at the foundations, especially when the building is shaking.
It certainly is. This has been an enlightening session, Korn. I always enjoy peeling back the layers with you.
Even the 101 subdivisions?
Especially those.
You are a nerd, Herman Poppleberry. But you are our nerd.
Guilty as charged.
We should probably get out of here before the breakout time expires on my patience for technical frameworks.
Fair enough. Let's head out.
Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flemingtop for keeping the show running smoothly behind the scenes. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show and help us stay on top of all these AI developments.
We really couldn't do it without them.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you are finding these deep dives useful, leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps the show find its way into more ears.
We appreciate the support.
You can find us at myweirdprompts.com for our full archive and all the ways to subscribe. We'll be back soon with another prompt from Daniel.
See you then.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the close from sloth